I've always wanted to be tall and thin. Could use a little nip tuck in Miami. Hi, everybody. My name's Jacqueline. I'm an alcoholic. And I am from Dallas. My home group is Sunday Morning Live. And I have been sober since November the 24th of 1987. So... I want to thank you for inviting me. Thank you for the committee. Thank you especially for George for being such a fabulous host. And just everybody. I mean, there's no question in my mind where all the beautiful people are in Miami tonight. And it's wild to be here. In my wildest dreams, I never, ever would have seen myself standing in front of a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous in Miami, Florida, United States of America, at any point in my life. And it just speaks to me about what the program of Alcoholics Anonymous can do in our lives. I mean, it just is amazing to me how, it's like, how did I get from there to here? And I'm going to share with you a little bit about what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. Obviously, I'm not from Texas. I kind of want to segue into one of those Dixie Chick moments, but I will not do that. We have no opinion on outside issues. However, no, I was actually born in London, in South London, and I believe for myself, and everybody has a different story in Alcoholics Anonymous, although the feelings ultimately end up, I think, being the same. I mean, there's a common feeling and a common bond between all of us, but I think that for myself, I was born into an alcoholic family. I believe that I have the gene of alcoholism that my father had, that my grandfather had, that my aunt had, and I came by this disease fairly honestly, I think. I also had a lot of little quirks about myself when I was growing up, and wasn't so much that I was aware that I didn't fit in, because I always felt I just felt like I was a pretty cool little girl most of the time, but I really had a problem with fitting in, and it started really young for me. I didn't drink until I was 12. But I exhibited what I considered to be the ism. And that was, when I was 4, my mum used to take us to ballet. We would catch the bus, we would go to this ballet class, and she'd leave us there and then come back an hour or so later to get us. And she came back to pick us up one day, and the teacher said, "Don't bring Jacqueline anymore. She spoils it for the other children." And when I was 7, I used to go to Brownies, and I went to Brownies, and next thing you know, they're telling my mum she can't come anymore. And that was for stealing, though. But I used to elaborate on that story, but this is probably something that won't mean that much to you guys here, but they used to have a different monetary system in England before they went decimal, and that part of my story is before England went decimal, which makes me absolutely ancient. So I leave the details of the crime out of my story. But anyway, so I'm out of Brownies, and then when I was 15, the exact same thing happened at school. The teachers called my parents to the school, and they said, "She can't be here anymore." And then when I was 17, my parents got together, and they said, "You can't live here anymore." And so that was a common theme in my life. Now, I did start drinking when I was 12, and I drank at home. I mean, my mum and dad partied and had people over, and they would have this little get-together cocktail party that started at 11 a.m. on Sunday mornings which later in life I kind of came to find out, that's not really a normal thing to do on a Sunday morning in most families. But we had a party, and I drank. I asked my mum and dad, can I drink? They said, drink whatever you want. I mean, if you're at home, it's fine. And by about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I was violently sick. I was passing out. I had to be put to bed. And I got to up the next morning to go to school. And I think that probably, I may have missed some, because it wasn't certainly my first drink, but it was my first really, really bad hangover. And I swore then, as a practicing alcoholic, that I would never, ever, ever, ever drink gin again. And as far as I was concerned, that was what the trouble was. And I basically did that. I mean, for the 20 years that I drank before I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I did what it talks about in More About Alcoholism, Chapter 3. I switched my drinks. I switched where I drank, and I switched who I drank with in order to try and stay ahead of myself. I did leave home when I was 17, and then for a brief period of time, I came back. My dad died of alcoholism at 43 years old. I was 19 then, and I got to see very clearly what this disease looks like when alcohol is no longer the friend. And instead of looking at that and saying to myself, wow, based on my life at 19, there's probably a common denominator there. I didn't do that. I took off, and I actually left and started doing these geographics. And my story, when people introduce themselves and they say, I'm an alcoholic addict, I think I should just say I'm an alcoholic everything. Because everything that I could be addicted to, I've been addicted to at some point in my life, whether it's food, whether it's sex, whether it's gambling, cigarette, whatever it is, I've gone there. And I left England and I started moving. And everywhere I moved, I felt like I was getting a fresh start. My first stop, I went to the Channel Islands for 6 weeks. And then I got more adventurous, and I ended up going to Canada, and I lived in Canada for a while. And then I came back, and I lived in France, and I lived in South Africa, and I lived in Belgium. And everywhere I went, shortly after I got there, I showed up. And I could hold it together. I could hold it together for a while, but I couldn't hold it together for very long. And if I wasn't doing one thing, then I was doing something else. And I am still, in terms of the way I function as a sober person, I still think that I do a lot of stuff like, I go to a meeting, and the first time I go there, I'll sit in a seat, and then the next week I'll show up and I go straight to that seat. I open a menu in a restaurant, and I pick something, and every time I go there, I eat the same thing. I ate a black cherry Yoplait yogurt every day for 4 years. And then all of a sudden it was over. It was gone. Yoplait could have gone out of business without me. But I have that. That is my, my nature. The drinking was a really major just was an insurmountable hurdle in my life because of the blackouts and because of the behaviors and because of the guilt and remorse that I felt. I most of the time didn't know what happened when I drank, but I always knew it was something bad. I always had that feeling, that sick-to-my-stomach feeling that something really bad had happened. And I started connecting with people that would look out for me, people that would take care of me. And ultimately, I met a guy, I'm trying to think, I was living in Belgium, and I met a guy, it was like 1970, well, it must have been 1978, 79, something like that, 1980. And he was from New Orleans, Louisiana. And I don't know about you guys, but for a practicing alcoholic, if anybody can tell me anywhere better to live than New Orleans, I just can't imagine. And I ended up marrying this man, which was very unfortunate for him. Because that was really the bad thing. You know, sometimes when you don't go into a blackout and then you remember later that you forgot that you were married when you were drinking, that's just, it's not good. Anyway, so we were married for 11 months. And during the time that I was married to him, I went to marriage counseling on my own. And I loved it. I love talking about myself for an hour. It's another common thing. I still do that now. Love to talk about me. Anyway, I did this marriage counseling thing, and the counselor kept confronting me about the fact that I would miss appointments, or that I would show up with a hangover, or I would show up and I would be drunk. And she felt that I had a problem with alcohol. And I felt like I had a problem with alcohol. I just didn't feel like it needed to be dealt with as, to such an extreme way that she did. She felt like I should take anti-abuse and go to Alcoholics Anonymous. And to kind of like placate her, I said I would go to AA. I would not take the anti-abuse because I knew that was going to be dangerous for me to take that and drink. And so I went to my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm trying to think, must have been 1985 or 86, and my first meeting was Lambda on Rampart Street in New Orleans. And it was a very small meeting at that particular time. I don't know. It was just a table, and there were some people sitting around the table. And I had a couple of drinks to go to the meeting because, you never know. Never know. And anyway, this guy at the meeting introduced himself, and he said, by the grace of God and the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, I haven't had a drink since. And I heard nothing but cult, cult, cult. And at that point, obviously it was my first meeting. I didn't know it wasn't interactive. I thought that if you wanted to, you could just yell out. You can yell out at the speaker. And so I banged on the table, to take the floor. I banged on the table. And I said, you know what? You didn't pick up a drink. Not God. You didn't pick up a drink. What's the God? There's no God. You didn't. And everybody just said, keep coming back. And I said, yeah, you must be bloody joking. And I left that meeting, and I, that grandiosity, that alcoholics have, and life was not going well. But you know what? I left that meeting, and within 100 feet, I had gone in a bar, and I had gotten a drink in a go-cup because I wouldn't be seen dead drinking in that bar. But I couldn't walk past there for another 40 feet to another bar. And I did. I drank, and I really don't know too much about, the next 2 years. One of the things that, it was maybe a year and a half. I got sober in November of 87, but ultimately what happened was I needed another geographic. I mean, it's funny. I really knew that I was going to die. If I stayed in the quarter, I knew that I wasn't going to make it. And I had done my usual thing. I had, the caretaker set up. I lived across the street from a 24-hour deli called the Verde Mart. And the guys in the Verde Mart would look out for me and take care of me. And they would say to me when I was going out, try and remember to call us when you're coming home so we can watch for you. And I just knew it was up. It was like I needed to stop and I needed to get out of there. And so I didn't need to stop drinking. I just needed to stop doing the stuff that was happening when I was drinking. And whatever that was. And so I moved. I did another geographic, and I went to Chicago. And I think, some people think that this is crazy to say this, but I do think that we are extraordinary people. And I do think that we have fabulous abilities to survive. And for me, I always seem to be able to get a job. and suit up and show up, clean up, suit up and show up for a brief period of time. And I did that. I got a great job. I moved to Chicago, and I was really into this therapy stuff. I went straight immediately to relocation and new job therapy. And I went to see this woman. And the first time I saw her, she asked me a basic questionnaire. You know, they go through the list about, you know, your parents living and all these things. And she said, do you have any issues with alcohol or drugs? And I got very defensive and offended and, you know, had to put her straight about, you know, I'm only here for new job relocation therapy. Not here about drinking. Not here about drugs. And the third session that I had with her was a 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning session. And the night before, and I had been in Chicago, I got there June, and so this was November. I'd only been there 5 months, and I'd really been trying to hold it together. And stuff, you know, that stuff that happens when we're not holding it together as well as we think. Like, I, you know, like was trying only to drink in my apartment. And I had fallen in the apartment and cut my head and woken up the next morning, and there's all this blood, and I'm thinking, oh, I could have died in the night with a head injury. But it was like I didn't even know how that happened. But anyway, I didn't want to mess up. I wanted to really do well. I had a great job, and I was trying to keep it together and only trying to drink on my own. And this guy at work said, would you like to go out for a quick drink after work? And I said, wow, that sounds nice. Yeah, I'd love to. And in the scheme of my drinking, that was nothing. That was nothing. You know, going out for a quick drink after work, going into a blackout, ending up staying at his house, having him drive me to my therapist was absolutely nothing. But the feelings that went with that, of that absolute pitiful, incomprehensible demoralization was everything. Everything. And I went into that therapist appointment and I said, I'm an alcoholic and I'll do anything not to live like this. And she said, good, because you need to go to treatment. And I said, accept that. Yeah. I just got a new job. They didn't sign up for that. And what happened was, and I've been in the program long enough now to I hear it. I hear other people doing what I did then. And that was I started negotiating for my life against myself. And I cut a deal with her that I would do an outpatient program and see how everything worked out. And then I went to the outpatient program and they said, you need to go to minimum 3 meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous a week. And I said, well, I can't do that because it's a religious cult. And I'm not religious. And they said, well, you've got to go anyway. And so I signed a piece of paper, 3 meetings a week, and I started going to a place in Chicago called the Mustard Seed. And I don't know why I picked the Mustard Seed other than the fact that I could walk there. Well, I didn't have a car either anymore, so I did have to walk wherever I was going to go. And I went to the Mustard Seed, and I hated it. I was totally uncomfortable, unfriendly. I did not walk into AA, to my second meeting and sit down and exhale and say, thank God I'm home. I sat down and went, this better end soon because I cannot stay here with these people. And I would people would come up to me and give me their phone numbers, and I would scrunch them up and throw them in the doorway on my way out. I hope she sees that when she's leaving. And so I had 3 months. I didn't have a drink for 3 months. I don't think I talked to anybody for 3 months at meetings. But I did do my 3 meetings a week. And at the end of the 3 months, I was at the Mustard Seed for a meeting. And I just sat there and I just couldn't do it anymore. And I hadn't shared, I always passed. And when it got to me, I just said, I'm Jacqueline, I'm an alcoholic, and I hate all of you. And I hate how I feel, and I hate my life, and I hate not drinking, and I hate everything about everything, and it's never going to change. And at the end of the meeting, and this is where it begins, some people came up to me and said, come and have a cup of coffee for us. And one of the people that asked me to go for coffee was wearing the best-looking coat that I think I'd ever seen. And I thought, I want what she's got. And I went for coffee, and I sat with that next to that woman, Annie, and I had 3 months, she had 9 months of sobriety. And I said, I was not holding hands at that time at the end of the meeting or saying a prayer. I said, I'm not saying prayers. This is scary to me, all this God stuff. And she said, so borrow my higher power. Use it as a loaner. You know, it's working for me, it'll work for you. And I took her loaner higher power. And this is the extraordinary thing, because we don't have like 5 hours for me to tell my story. But from that point, I baby stepped a little bit. I mean, I didn't leap straight out of that coffee and ask somebody to be my sponsor, God forbid. But what I did was I started thinking that maybe it could work for me. Maybe it could work for me. And the beauty of it was, from going at 3 months of sobriety to hating Alcoholics Anonymous and everybody in the program, when I was 32 when I got sober, and when I turned 40, my 40th birthday coincided with the International Conference for Alcoholics Anonymous in San Diego. And for my birthday, that was what I wanted to do. More than anything, was I wanted to go to San Diego to the international conference, to be with 40,000 alcoholics. And that's the gift of the program, is I had done a complete turnaround. And I went to that convention, and the first night, it was a Friday night, and I'm sitting in my seat in the stadium. There's thousands and thousands of people. I'm like, this is mind-blowing. I mean, it was just so extraordinary. You could feel the energy. And I looked over on the other side of the aisle from me, and Annie, the girl that had loaned me her higher power at 3 months of sobriety, was sitting there. And that, to me, is how my higher power works in my life. You know, I had left Chicago at 7 months of sobriety and moved to L.A., and I hadn't seen her for years and years and years, and she still had 6 months more than me. And I still had her higher power. I was still working with my loaner. And it was extraordinary. When I moved to LA, when I was 7 months of sobriety, I asked a woman if she would be my sponsor there. And she and I worked together for a short period of time. She's one of my dear friends today. She was not a good sponsor for me as a newcomer in Alcoholics Anonymous. And the reason she wasn't a good sponsor was I could manipulate her and con her into doing stuff that she probably shouldn't have done. And I was dating I had this feeling. At the time, in the beginning of my sobriety, I still had my married boyfriend from before I got sober, and I thought he might be cheating on me, which is an extraordinary concept. And so I actually talked my then sponsor, into making anonymous phone calls for me with phone numbers that I found at his house. And we would stand in her kitchen going, oh my God, we're so bad. Anyway, probably not the best formula, for recovery, but still a great formula for a dear friend. Anyway, she's still naughty. I mean, she's just fabulous. And so anyway, after I worked with her, there was another woman that I met in LA, and I wanted to work with her, but she was pretty tough. And one of the reasons I wanted to work with her, and I like to share this from the podium, and that is there was other stuff going on for me when I got sober. And that was, I had started getting really phobic about a multitude of different things, but they were incapacitating my life. And I was phobic about driving my car over bridges. I was phobic about going in grocery stores. I couldn't go in a department store off at the first level. I had to touch the building on Michigan Avenue with my elbow. I had all of these things that were making my world smaller. And in sobriety, in early sobriety, I met a woman that when she went to Alcoholics Anonymous for the first time, 2 women came to her house to get her, to take her to a meeting. And it was the first time she'd been outside for 4 years. She had not left her house for 4 years. She had her liquor delivered. And she went to that meeting in the Pacific Palisades that I went to when I was about a year or so sober. And I asked her if she would be my sponsor. Her name is Sonia Morris. And she always told me that the weaver weaves. And we're all threads on the same tapestry. And she died on February the 11th of this year. But one of the first things that she said to me when I very first met her and I asked her to be my sponsor was, she thought about it for a second and she said, you know, Jacqueline, you remind me of a bird that flies in ever-reducing circles until you eventually fly up your own arse. Yeah. Yeah. The measure of the man. So I wasn't her first crazy sponsee to come along. And anyway, she started working with me, and she had a different way of doing things with me. Like, I was so obsessive about stuff, which probably sounds familiar. I would get obsessed about stuff. You know, I got divorced 3 years ago, but my husband that I divorced 3 years ago is a guy in the program, and we were together for 18 years. But, you know, and this is the craziness of Alcoholics Anonymous, I used to stalk him. I was like 2 years sober, and I would be stalking him, and I would tell my sponsor about it, and I ultimately told him, and he married me anyway. But she was really, she was the beginning of a relationship for me that taught me so much about life and love. And maybe I'll talk a little bit more about her. It's really a gift and an honor to be her sponsee. But anyway, so I'm sober, and I'm still resistant to the God thing. And 2 years of sobriety, my boyfriend broke up with me. And I had always had that suicide thing going on for myself. I always felt like if it really gets bad, I'll just kill myself. You know, that's my little back pocket. That's the ace in the hole. And what happened when he broke up with me was, for the first time, I got it, what you guys were talking about when you talked about that hole inside of you, because I didn't really get that. And I used to hear people at meetings start talking about the hole, and I would like verbally exhale and roll my eyes and go, oh, you know, not another hole. I had no clue what anybody was talking about when they said that. And what happened for me was, he broke up with me. I wasn't drinking. I didn't do drugs. And I found out what you guys were talking about with that hole. And I felt absolutely, completely, and utterly lost. And I was 2 years sober, and I'm still tinkering around with the steps. I didn't do my third step until I was 2 years sober, more than that. And I wanted to kill myself. And I went to a women's meeting that I hadn't been to before, and it was a third step meeting, and I just interrupted. I've only ever done that twice, at the first meeting I went to, and then at the meeting when I said I need to do my third step. I don't know what to do. And it was so simple This woman gave me a piece of paper. She said, right, I'm willing to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understand him. And we did that, and we all held hands, and we said third step prayer, and boom! Not quite. But, but in conjunction with that third step, I took a commitment at a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And for me, it was big. It was a major commitment. And the commitment was, because the meetings at LA that I was going to, a lot of them were an hour and a half. So you had a little break. And at the break, you had a little snack. But it was an LA meeting, so the snack had to be healthy. And I took the food commitment, which meant that I had to go in a grocery store. But I couldn't race in and race out before I had an anxiety attack. I had to stand in there and make sure there was no more than 5 ingredients on the dip, because then it wasn't healthy. Couldn't have anything with, like, Adeline at the end of it. And even the chips. So I had that commitment, and so I was doing that grocery store thing, and then I had started as well saying the Serenity Prayer. I had learned the Serenity Prayer, and I just started saying it. You know, if I was overwhelmed or nervous, or if I have to drive over a bridge, I would say the Serenity Prayer over and over and over. And for the first 2 years of my sobriety, even without me being aware of it, pretty much for several years, at nighttime when I went to sleep, I would say, thank you for keeping me sober. Just in case, to nothing in particular. And then I started, I worked with Sonia, and I worked the steps, and I had this job that I had gotten right before I got sober, and I started doing well with that. And then I met a guy on the AA campus, and, I was at a meeting, and Friday night candlelight meeting. And they were giving chips, and they gave a 6-month chip, and I heard this chair scrape behind me, and there he was. And somebody told me the reason you don't get involved in newcomers isn't for the newcomer, it's for the person that has the time. Because ultimately the person that's got the time's thinking, I can handle this, and you can't, or I couldn't. And it took 18 years, but there we go. I don't know. I'm not going to mention that other program because I don't go, but God, I wish I had. I wish I had. Anyhow, so here I am now. It's time to get married in Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, the first time I got married in England to my New Orleans husband, I had a huge wedding. And my mom was not yet married to, but was going to ultimately end up being married to my stepdad. And he was not somebody he was not my pick for my mother, which, interestingly enough, at that time I didn't know that wasn't my choice. I felt I had a say in those kinds of things, and I didn't. So because I didn't like the relationship, I actually walked down the aisle at my first wedding on my own. I wouldn't allow him to do anything except write a check to pay for the wedding. And here I am now. I'm in, I can't even remember. I think I was 5 years sober, and I'm going to get married again. And I went to my sponsor and I said, I've never made amends to my stepdad for how badly I behaved. So she said, well, it's not too late. And so I wrote an amends letter, because he lived in England and I'm in LA. And I wrote this amends letter, and I read it to Sonia. And in typical Sonia fashion, she said, wow, you did a great job on that. Except, let's just take all the parts about him out and leave your part in. So we'll go with the first paragraph. We'll kill everything else and include the last paragraph. And she was right, because the whole point of the amends was, to stay on my side of the street. And so I sent the letter, and I said, I'm getting married again, and I'm going to get married in Yosemite, at the little chapel in the Yosemite Valley, and if you would if you would go the distance with me this time, I would be grateful. And you know what? My stepdad came, my mom and some other relatives from England, and they came over, and he walked me down the aisle in that little chapel, and I have never regretted that. It has always been one of the biggest gifts of my program, because shortly after that, he became very, very ill. And then he wasn't there. I mean, he was still alive, but he wasn't home anymore in his own body. And he would get agitated by different people, but he couldn't speak anymore. But whenever I came to visit, he always was relaxed and he was calm and he felt loved and loving to me. And I think that that was the gift of the program and that amends. And it was like the ripple effect, because it meant so much to my mom. And, I really do think that all of the work that I've done, even though I'm a slow go, 2 years to do the third step, and I'm making an amends to my stepdad, which is kind of like immediate family at 5. It took what it took. So a couple of years after I got married, I really got in the swing of LA life. I grew up in England, and it's very cold, and it's rainy and dreary and gray, and when I got to LA, I just thought that was the most spectacularly fabulous place on earth. I loved everything about it. And I was there for 7.5 years, and I still had that job. And they said to me, we want to open an office in Dallas, and we want you to go and do that, which technically, that's a really great thing. That they would want me to do that. The downside of it was that I had to move, and so I moved to Dallas somewhat reluctantly. I had gone from having my food commitment to being a treasurer, to being a secretary, to being a literature person, to work, helping at central office, doing all those things, always having a service commitment. And I moved to Dallas in 1995, and it was all clubs, and I was having trouble. I was kind of like floundering around, and when I had... in LA one time, I had been at Cedar Sinai on a 6 o'clock Saturday night meeting, and a guy from Dallas took a 12-year chip there. His name is Jack C. And he, one of the first meetings I went to when I moved to Dallas, I ran into him. And he really helped me. He introduced me to my friends. I have 2 friends, one of whom spoken here, Michael A., and Harvey and Michael and I, the 3 of us, have had dinner on Tuesday night, every Tuesday night for years now. And I'm never, ever alone. No matter where I go with AA, I don't have to worry about it. The thing that started happening in Dallas was Jack introduced me to people, and I started telling my story or doing the steps and what have you, and then he introduced me to a woman that today is one of my best friends, Jacqueline, and she did a prison program to Gatesville, and it's a 3-hour drive there and a 3-hour drive back, and it's about 5 meetings during the day, and it's an all-day thing. And I started going down to Gatesville with Kathleen and a bunch of other women, and I met my sponsor. I think that when I'm working the steps, for me, I need to look somebody in the eye. And I didn't get to LA enough to see Sonia to read some of the stuff that I was writing. So I got a Dallas sponsor, Joanne, and I picked her, not because she was tough, but because she was so loving. And I wanted to kind of round out some of the edges on me, and she's really been fabulous for that. But we started doing this Gatesville run, and it was huge, and I got really involved in service, and I was doing Gatesville, and then I got hooked up with some people, and we started taking meetings down to juvenile detention on Friday night, and we had the 11 to 17-year-old girls in there, and I'm doing Gatesville, and I'm doing this, and I'm sponsoring people, and I'm what have you, and I am angry. Angry. And on one of these runs down to Gatesville, because what was happening with the anger was I was 10 years sober, but I wanted to kill myself again. And I thought that I was done with that. I thought when I read the 6th step in the 12 and 12, and I saw that it said, God and nature alike, abhor suicide, I thought that I was past that, and I wasn't past it. And we went to Gatesville one time, and there was me. I was in the car with just 2 women, Marilyn and Kathleen, and they said, you know what, Jacqueline? One of them said, you make me want to ride with the windows down. You are so toxic. and you are so angry. And if you don't get outside help, I don't know what's going to happen to you. And I heard her, and I had a friend come and stay from L.A., and she had just mentioned that her relative was a therapist, and she tried to get a hold of this woman while she was at my house, and she had written the woman's name on a catalog, a little bowl catalog on my table. And that Monday, I don't know how, but that catalog was on my desk at work. I'm like, well, that's so strange. I don't remember bringing it in. But there was this woman's number, and I called her, and I said, can I come in and see you? Now, unbeknownst to me, she was 18 years sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I sat in front of her, and I said, she said, what's your program? I said, I'm sober. And she said, well, what do you do with your program? I go, I have a great program. I'm sponsoring a bunch of people. She goes, yeah, and? And I go, yeah, well, I go to Gatesville. I take meetings to the prison. She goes, and? I go, well, juvenile detention. She goes, that's 1 and 12. Where's 2 through 11? And it didn't exist. And, it's in the book. It talks about two-stepping in the book. And it didn't exist. And she said to me, why don't you just slow down and let me just see. She said, just go home and just start writing an inventory. Just write it. And I came back the next week. I had 183 resentments just to my job. I hadn't started anything else, just to the job. And then she said to me, why don't you write? She said, you're clearly not sane. Why don't you write down what it would look like if you were sane? And I said, well, I can do that. I can do that right now, And I had already told her at a certain point that I didn't think I was getting anything out of this, and I didn't think I was going to come anymore because she wasn't really very good. And she said, well, you might think I'm better if you actually did the work. So I stayed a little while longer. Anyway, but what she said to me on this second step was, this redo on the second step, was write down what sanity would look like in your life. And so I wrote this list of things, and it was like I would relax more. I would soak in a hot bath, And I went back to her and I read this list of things, and she said, you did that wrong. And I said, I don't think so. I did what you asked me to do. She said, no, I asked you what it would look like if you were sane. That's the present tense. She said, change it right now. Sit here and change the future to the present tense. And I went through and I wrote across the lines and I put it, I am, I do, I am. And I finished it and I read it out loud to her and I said, it's not true. And she said, then act as if. Act as if. And she was absolutely for me right. I had just gotten so far off the beam, and what I did then was I got into a step study with a bunch of other women, and, I did this step study with them, and I was restored once again, because the key is not to drink. The key for me is not to drink. I can go wacky. I mean, I did this whole inventory at one point earlier in my sobriety that I read to Sonia, and Sonia said to me, okay, when you leave here, I want you to go home. I want you to take the book down. I want you to review the first 5 steps, and I want you to take quiet time for an hour, and then call me. Well, I called her, but I didn't take the book down to do the quiet time. I actually went to a payphone and called a guy that lived near where she lived to see what he was doing, and if it could include me. But I never mentioned that. I never mentioned it to her. And about a year later, I felt, I was with a bunch of women, and I said, I think I'm going to drink. And I told somebody what I had done after reading that 5th step, and she said, well, did you drink? And I said, no. She said, you need to go home now. We were in Big Bear. She said, you need to leave right now and go see your sponsor. And I went home, and I went to Sonia's house, and I said, this is what happened after I read that inventory to you. I didn't do what you told me to do. And she said, did you drink? And I said, I didn't. And she said, go home, take the book down, read the first 5 steps, and then call me after an hour. And, that's the way for me that as long as I don't drink, I keep going. And the life that I have today is absolutely extraordinary. It blows my mind. I moved to Dallas. I got involved in service work. I got involved in step studies. I started doing well. And then, you know what? Life happens. And I'm trying to think of the order of this. But what happened was it wasn't working out well for me at the job. By this time, I'm 16 years on this job. And it had become part of my identity. And then it wasn't working so well. And then ultimately, I didn't have the job anymore. And then right around when that happened, I was always traveling. I was always on the road. And I was calling my husband, and we had a masseuse, a woman in the program, a friend that was also a massage therapist. And so I would be traveling, and she would be coming over, and then it turned out that it had a happy ending. And not for me, by the way. Although ultimately it did, I guess. Yeah. So that I found out about that. That's really a gut level. I don't want to call it a betrayal, because you know what? We can't lose sight of the fact that we may be members of Alcoholics Anonymous, and we may be in recovery, and we may be sober, but you know what? We're still human beings, and we still do shitty things. We still do things that aren't that great. And so that happened, and then I got breast cancer. And then, trying to think what happened after that. It was just like never ending. It was like never ending. It was like, oh my God, she's down. You know those little dolls? You know those like inflatable dolls with the weight on the bottom? You punch them, they go down, and then they spring back up. Like, that was me. I was like, damn. No, I'm up. Oh, shit. I'm down. No, I'm up. Anyway, that was kind of what it felt like at that time. But you know what? There was nothing. This is the key as well. There was nothing that I was going through that somebody else hadn't gone through before. I actually got a phone call today. I got a voicemail today from a friend of mine in Dallas saying that a woman that she's sponsoring is just told her that she's about to get divorced, and can she give her my number because of, I've done that. Some of the things that have been the hardest to go through have been the best things that I've had to share with other people. And my sponsor and my sponsor are both breast cancer survivors. I didn't have to do that together. My sponsor had another sponsee that was 2 weeks ahead of me in her treatment. And when we finished our treatment, we did the Komen together. So, it's just amazing that when I look back, I think, well, you know what? It was okay. I actually had a doctor's appointment last week, and they asked me if I had any surgeries, and I forgot about the breast cancer. I completely forgot all about it, and which is great. So here now, I'm 3 years ago, and I did not, when I found that whole stuff about my husband, I didn't get divorced at that time. And you know what happened to me? I lost my authentic self because I kept saying to myself, I am not the woman I thought I was. I kept saying, I don't believe that I'm still doing this, but I kept doing it. I didn't know how not to do it. And then ultimately, 3 years ago, from somewhere, the words, I want a divorce, just came out. They didn't just come out like that. I mean, it was like more information. Same old, same old. But I was done. I was done, and I didn't have to say to myself, I'm not the woman I thought I was. I am the woman I know I am today. I don't need to do that. And I don't want to do that anymore. I want to be as fabulous as I can be for myself. And so the great news about that was I kept the dog. I worked really hard to keep that dog, guys. I really, really did. He's a really big German Shepherd, and he got confused initially about who was alpha. And And I would have these big meltdowns in the house, and it didn't matter where he was in the house. When he heard me crying, he would run over and try and hump me. And you're going to like this. Right. Wait a minute. Not so fast, Missy. Yeah. So, because I learned my lessons, I had him neutered. We should take this on the road. Yeah. Anyway, so I just want to say there's a couple of things. You know, life has ended up being pretty cool. I'm trying to think, like just over 2 years ago, Tammy, my friend and sponsee that came to the conference with me, she had started calling me and asking me if I would sponsor her. And most of the time, you know, I would say yes. But with her, I just intuitively knew, say no. Don't go there. Don't go there. But so I said no. And then ultimately I said to her, do you want to come into this step study? We're doing a step study. And she started doing the step study, and then she needed somewhere to stay. And then I started sponsoring her. And then I said, would you want to stay at my house for a little while? And 2 years later, she still lives at the house. And last year, when I got the call from Sonia saying that she wanted to, first of all, when she died, she was 92 years old. She was 50 years sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. And she called and said she wanted to move into an assisted living. And so Tammy and I I went out there and I helped her find a place. And then Tammy and I drove to LA and we got her situated in a place. And she was the life and soul of this place, just fabulous. And then on January 10th, they called me and said that they had taken her to the hospital. And she, in 1 month, just totally everything was over. She was over and she was done. But I got to, first of all, you know, through sponsoring Tammy and then introducing her, you know, to Sonia and how fabulous she was. And then having the gift of being able to do that journey with her, to actually be there with her at the end and show up. You know, that's the miracle. I don't care how much time we have. That's the deal. It's still in my mind. It blows my mind that I show up. And I got to LA when she was first diagnosed. Well, I got there. I went twice, real quick. But I went down. I had a business thing to do in San Diego, so I got there on the Sunday night. And on the Monday, I went to the facility where she was, and she was okay. She was like lovely. And on the Tuesday, I told the people I'm going to go down to San Diego, and then I will come back. And then I'm just going to stay here for as long as I need to stay. And on Tuesday, I was in San Diego, and it was, I finished my meeting. I got in the car. It was 3:45. I started driving back to L.A. at 3:45 in the evening from San Diego, which is just a horrible time to try and do that. And they called me from the place and said, you need to come over right now. And I'm like, oh, my God, I'm like 3.5 hours away. And I don't know, guys, this has happened twice recently for me, but I pulled into L.A. at 6 o'clock. It took me 2 hours and 15 minutes, and the traffic just moved out of the way. And it wasn't that I drove crazy or wild. It was like the universe said, you know what? You need to be there, and we'll just put you there. And I got to be there, and I got to stay there, and I got to plan, she was really great. She had everything like she wanted, like this person needs to sing and they need to sing this song, and this is the photo of myself that I want in the newspaper and at the service blown up. And it was just extraordinary. And the women from the meetings that she go to just all pulled together, and everybody came together, and we had this most incredible service for her. It was absolutely phenomenal. And it was from 1989 where she had taught me how to be open to a long-term relationship. And she was my longest-term relationship with a non-blood relative. And I will never not be grateful to her, ever, for what she did for me. Life is meant to be lived, and she was ready to go. She definitely was ready to go. And, the other thing that happened was, last year, I know I don't look like it, but I actually climbed the Grand Canyon from the top to the bottom and back. And Tammy and I did it. There was 5 of us signed up to do it, and there was 2 of us that did it. And we set out. It was ice. We had crampons on our shoes, and I stepped out onto that canyon, and it zigzags at the top. And Tammy is like, "Oh my God, it's beautiful!" And I was looking at the rock. I'm like, "It's not a bridge, just And then I managed to look out, and I was like, "This is just unbelievable. Unbelievable. This is Mother Nature at her best." And for me, it was an incredibly hard trip. It took me 7 hours to get down and 11 hours to get out. And on the way out, I got obsessed with the time. I was like, I don't want to be on this mountain in the dark. And I was worried about, and I'm calculating. I'm looking at the map, and I'm saying, okay, we're going to be here for 2 hours when it's dark. Oh, God, And then I started chanting, which is another thing. I'm happy, healthy, whole, and strong. I'm happy, healthy, whole, and strong. And then I'm thinking, I'm not going fast enough. So I throw in grateful. I'm grateful, happy, healthy, whole, and strong. I'm grateful, happy, healthy, strong. And we get up to like the 3-mile marker, and I'm like, I'm bloody going to die out here. And, the same thing happened in San Diego. These people went past, and this guy goes, "Look, the second tunnel." And I go, "We're at like 2 miles to go before we see that." And he goes, "No, it is." I go, "It's not a tunnel. It's an arch." And he goes, "No, it is. You've only got 3/4 of a mile to go." And somehow, I don't know how, a big chunk of the Grand Canyon disappeared. And as the sun was setting, we stepped out. And that's sobriety. That's the joy of living. That's a new freedom and a new happiness. I mean, I was so constricted before I came to you guys. I was so afraid to do anything, and so hyper aware of myself and is my pulse too, all this nonsense. And now it's like, what? I can hike the Grand Canyon. I can suit up and show up for my sponsor who gave me the life that I have today, collectively with you guys, and I can go for it. I can just go for it. And you guys are truly awesome and fabulous and wonderful, and I love you dearly. Thank you for my life. Right. Thank you. And thank you, too.